Everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to The Good Trouble Show. People often think the UAP phenomenon is just an issue for the United States, but in fact, this is an issue worldwide, and the United Kingdom is no exception. Today, think tank analyst Franc Milburn is joining us. I'm off to an awesome start here. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up button on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and all other social media platforms at The Good Trouble Show. Leave a comment, share, like, give a thumbs up, and subscribe, all that stuff we certainly appreciate. You can also find us on all your favorite podcasting platforms as well. Just search for The Good Trouble Show. You can become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show financially by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And for the price of a coffee, you can support our work. Finally, on YouTube, Super Chats are open and are a great way to show your financial appreciation for our work. I want to thank our financial supporters both on Patreon and on YouTube, and of course, as always, our chat moderators who volunteer their time, and everyone here who supports our show. We always are appreciative of the generosity of your time. And back to the podcast, we're a little bit slow on getting our old episodes out. We're trying to get caught up. Usually, what we try to do is we'll do a show, and then around 2 weeks later, we'll post it on Spreaker. So we got a little bit behind, but we're trying to catch up. Anyway, so yeah, stay tuned for that. And just like I said, on any of your podcasting platforms, just search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford, and you should find us. So moving on, our next guest is a former British Defense Intelligence officer and an alumnus of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and the London School of Economics. He has written peer-reviewed papers for numerous globally ranked think tanks and is a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Please welcome Mr. Franc Milburn. Frank, how are you, sir?
It's great to be on, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Sorry, I think I kind of butchered your name in the very beginning.
No stress, mate.
When I first start the show off, especially if I'm running a little bit behind like I have been today, I didn't have much of a chance to rehearse, and it's usually the last name I tend to mess up. I had Admiral Tim Gallaudet on here. Oh, it was probably like 2 months ago. Actually, it was, I think it might have been in June or so. And every time I addressed him, I completely mispronounced his last name. When I ran into him at Seoul, the first thing I said was, number one, thank you for coming on the show. And then I said, number two, my apologies for butchering your name. That wasn't a very good talk show host move on my part. So, yeah, what are you going to do?
Didn't mind, Matt.
Yeah, he's a very nice guy. So how are things across the pond?
Yeah, great. I have to say, I can't complain.
Excellent. So this is your first time here. I've followed your work for quite some time and am super excited to have you on here. I know other people are as well. And I'm just going to say it from the beginning. I am not a ufologist. I'm not a researcher. My knowledge about the UAP issue is kind of like a big chunk of Swiss cheese or lots of holes in it, the least of which is my knowledge about the UAP issue overseas, especially in the UK. So I'm going to be relying on you to kind of fill me in on all of that.
Sure, no problem, Matt.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So so before we jump into your military service, which I think is really fascinating, how old were you when you first became interested in this whole UAP phenomenon?
Yes, kind of as early as I can remember, because my parents are sort of into it. Actually, in my house in Spain, I've got a book from the 1960s, which my parents had by Sanderson, Uninvited Visitors. And I was kind of brought up with, mysteries of Atlantis and things like that. I think I read Chariots of the Gods at a pretty early age for what that was worth. But yeah, I was brought up with it, and to have a kind of open mind about mysteries in general and phenomena.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't really get into this until I think I was around like 9 years old, and came across in my local elementary school. I found a book on the Barney and Betty Hill thing, and this was also around the time that the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie came out. And after that, I was hooked. But I don't know about you, but I kind of was interested in it for a bit, but then sort of fell out of interest as other things sort of came up and grabbed my attention. But yeah, so this is something you've really had, it's been on your radar for quite some time.
Yeah, but I mean, very similar to you in a way. I mean, I read these kind of books, and I was in the military, and it kind of completely went off my radar because I was busy doing other things. And then after I came out in the sort of late '90s, I was reading sort of like the books by Timothy Good, Nick Pope, Nick Redfern, the kind of the sort of main authors, and then also by Richard Dolan. And then 2016, I don't know why, but I joined the Richard Dolan member site, which I'm not with now, but and that kind of piqued my interest. Something was pulling me towards it. And then from there, I started, I was collating all the information, analyzing that I could get my hands on. And then by sort of 2020, that's when I started, writing my own material on it. And still to this day, trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And you mentioned that your family was into this. Had they experienced the phenomenon at all?
Yeah, my mother, her mother, and her father are what you would call experiencers. And when I was actually growing up, we always had kind of all kinds of experiences coming to the house, whether they were sort of more and more like mediumship side, or the sort of other phenomena side. But the house was always filled with people like that, really interesting guests from all over the world. And yeah, I was always kind of brought up to keep an open mind. I came from sort of very liberal family. I'd say loosely religious, but I was brought up to always kind of keep an open mind to possibilities.
Yeah, that's I was pretty much brought up in the same way, but I didn't encounter anything until I started looking into this. So this wasn't something that has been a thing that ran through my family or anything of that nature. But interesting, yeah. So this is something that's been on your radar for quite some time, and it sounds as if your family was pretty open to the whole idea. So if you came in and said you saw something, they would definitely believe you and not be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was at university, just before going for officer training, there was a friend of the family who's a famous American medium, and her partner was who's now deceased, a British medium. So I was going and doing for months doing meditation courses with them, past life regressions, really interesting stuff, which my mother and my grandmother kind of pushed me towards doing, and it's one of the best things that I ever did. It wasn't kooky or weird at all. It was actually a great experience. Again, sorry. It wasn't kooky or weird at all. It was a great experience.
Yeah. It's definitely something else. That is for sure. So, and speaking of your family, you actually come from a family that has quite a long history of military service to your country. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can trace my family all the way back to beyond 1066 when they came with the Norman Conquest, and pretty much all the male members of my family have been in the military. Grandparents on both sides, great grandparents on both sides, going back even further. My father was in the military. My stepfather was in the military. My godfather was in the military. My uncle was in the military. My great uncle, my great aunt was in World War II. She was a nurse. Both battles of El Alamein. So I've got a long family, and also my great uncle as well, who was in the Navy in World War II, the Royal Navy.
Impressive.
So yeah, a long family history. Yeah.
And we'll dig into your military stuff here in a bit, but I'm curious, any of your family that served, did they ever tell you any stories of UAP while in their various theaters of conflict?
No, not UAP, but because I said my father's the direct opposite. My natural father, he's direct opposite of my mother. He doesn't believe in kind of he's not integrated into any of that kind of stuff about phenomena or UAP. But my grandfather, my grandmother. I mean, my grandfather served in both world wars. He was in the Indian Army from an early age. Served in France and Palestine, Turkey, Syria as well, and while they were living in India, they'd go and see, Indian holy men being buried for like 4 days, reducing their pulse rate and their respiration, and basically having a British soldier standing guard over the grave. And then after 4 days, they'd get dug up and they were still alive. So they were very much open to all those kind of like sort of the Eastern mysticism, I guess.
That's amazing. One thing I've always kind of been curious about is if what the the UAP, what the history is as far as like forces encountering UAP prior to like World War II or prior to our nuclear infrastructure being built up. And we know that we hear a lot of that going on today, but I'm curious, in times prior to that, if it was a much reduced rate or if it just simply increased after we developed our atomic bombs. But anyway, so tell us a bit about your military background. We spoke a little bit yesterday, and you filled me in, and I thought it was really pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, from an early age, I knew I wanted to be a soldier, and I had my heart set on being airborne. I joined at 17, and I was, very firmly supported by my family in doing so. So I was still in school at the time. So I was a reservist for like 3 years, and then I got picked up for officer. And at the same time, I received a place at university because I just finished school just previously. So I'd been offered a place at university and sponsorship. So I went off and did that. So I did university for 3 years, and I went to the Royal Military Academy. And then from there, I got recruited for defense intelligence.
Okay. And you were a paratrooper as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and I started out as a paratrooper at 17, yeah.
Wow. And for those of us that have no idea what a paratrooper does, give us a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for Americans, let's say the British Army Parachute Regiment is the probably the equivalent of the 75th Ranger Regiment. That gives people an idea of what they do. It's basically air assault operations, whether it's parachute, insertion by parachute or by helicopter. Just to seize tactical and strategically important objectives, or as a fast intervention force. At the moment, it's kind of like the parachute regiment, 16 Air Assault Brigade is the tip of Britain's rapid intervention force, along with the Royal Marines. Now, so they respond to crises anywhere around the world.
Understood. And I've got a couple of photos that you sent here. So where is this? If you can see that.
Oh yeah, sure. That was in. Where was that? That was near Tikrit, Saddam's hometown in the Sunni Triangle in Iraq in 2007, and that was just during the surge. General Petraeus had taken over, and we were part of the brief. We were training Iraqi militia, basically Sunni militia, who had got upset with Al Qaeda, shall we say, and we were supporting them and training them to sort of guard locations and to operate against Al Qaeda.
Is this a Humvee you're in, or what is the vehicle? I'm curious.
Some old beaten up civilian 4x4. So I was a contractor then, so we were driving civilian vehicles. But yeah, they were a lot of fun, and there's a lot of endemic animal life as well. There were like sort of big wild dogs, desert foxes, and sort of wildcats as well. All of which ended up getting fed.
I would definitely feed him as well. And let's see here. Here's not that one.
Well, it's also good to feed them because they tell you it's good to feed them because they tell you what's going on. So if they start sniffing the air and worrying about things, then maybe you should too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, what are we looking at here? You're here with some fellow.
I'm with some local Iraqi Sunni blokes there. Mm-hmm. Some of the guys that I was training, and I'd inspect them, make sure that their weapon drills were good, make sure the weapons were clean, account for all the equipment, the weapons, the radios, the ammunition, make sure that nobody was loafing when they were supposed to be working.
Now, so let's talk about your time as a counterintelligence officer. So Lou Elizondo, he was a counterintel guy, and you hear his critics, these nutty debunkers and whatnot say, oh, you can't trust Lou Elizondo because he's a counterintel guy and he's going to be lying to you. I think 99.9% of the people have no idea what a counterintelligence officer is. And of course, no idea why this argument from the folks that says you can't trust a counterintel guy is just a total BS. So if you don't mind, walk us through what you do as a counterintelligence guy.
Yeah, sure. As a counterintelligence guy, there's basically two facets to counterintelligence. There's the security intelligence side, where you are, gathering and effectively assessing and disseminating information and then turning it into intelligence on the nature of the threat facing you. And then there's the security side, which is the security measures that you put into place as a result of those counterintelligence, security intelligence operations. But I'd say in terms of trustworthiness, I mean, to be an intelligence officer or a counterintelligence officer, you have to have a high level of integrity. Otherwise, they wouldn't put you in the job because they're trusting you with things. And I also say generally, I mean, every uniformed guy that I've met, I mean, obviously you get idiots everywhere, but at that kind of level, no. I mean, you have integrity, and you are absolutely trusted because you've got the keys to the kingdom effectively. And I just give you an example. When I was at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, I mean, the integrity thing, it's a bit like at West Point, where actually I've got my nephews at West Point at the moment. Sorry, my godson's at West Point. I served with his father. His father's Brit, but he was born in America. Anyway, cut a long story short, you have to have integrity. So at Sandhurst, if you're found lying about anything as an officer cadet, that's grounds for immediate expulsion from the academy if you're found to be lying, because in the heat of battle or any other time, you have to have integrity. So people who say, oh, you can't trust him, this or that, that's rubbish. The only people who can't trust counterintelligence agencies are the enemies. Whether it's like organized crime, hostile intelligence service, whatever it is. Because you do psychological operations and things like that. You do well, actually, psychological operations is more of a different sphere, but you might sort of dip into it. But you are carrying out operations to deceive people, to provide operational security cover. But in terms of trust, generally, you have to be a person of high integrity. So people who say that you can't trust people like Elizondo are really kind of like talking out of their backsides. And
yeah, that is for sure. And I think if we ever want to get an expert on as far as psychological operations, I have Susan Goff's phone number. I'll be happy to get her on, and she can conduct a master class on how to conduct psychological propaganda operations on the American public. That is for sure. But
she literally wrote the book, though.
She did, yeah. Her master's thesis is in the thing, so yeah, that's no surprise. No surprise there. I wonder if she's still chasing Sean Kirkpatrick around in the hallway. So going back to being a counterintelligence agent. So really, in that position, you are protecting your country from spies and whatnot who are coming or trying to infiltrate your intelligence services or your military, whatnot. So you're really protecting your country as a counterintel guy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you've got kind of the standard, kind of sources of threat. You've got, espionage, sabotage, terrorism, subversion, and yeah, I mean, you're protecting, you're protecting personnel, you're protecting locations, you're protecting operations, you're protecting sensitive material against, loss, theft, unauthorized disclosure. So yeah, it's a responsible thing that you have to do.
Yeah, but the takeaway that I get from you is that the number one attribute you must have to do that job is absolute integrity.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I've never understood you've got people like John Greenwald and all these other folks that are just literally obsessed with Lou. It's like being some creepy guy like stalking a girlfriend. They do not let it go. I do not understand it. It's very sad.
Well, I'll say from my part, I mean, if I had to be in a trench with someone, it wouldn't be that lot, but it would be Lou. Lou would be one of the blokes that I want next to me.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. So tell us, so you're working as a counterintel officer, counterintelligence officer. Tell us about your first experience while you were in the military, maybe not encountering UAP firsthand, but hearing about it from other people that you were working with.
Well, yeah, there's the story in the Daily Mail. Where I was working alongside some pilots, and people should look at the Daily Mail. First off, based on some of the comments that I've seen, I haven't read all of them. Hang on, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You got me okay?
Broke up for a little bit, but yeah, you're fine now.
Yeah, I just want to say, you get the impression from some people, these are the same people who expect people like Hal Puthoff, Lou Elizondo, Kit Green, Dr. Eric Davis to just divulge everything and spill the beans and break their security oaths and hang it all out in public. That's just not realistic, guys. That's just not realistic. So In terms of the story, I mean, you need to look at the story, what it actually says. This is a story that I'm providing. It's not like whistleblowing. In fact, it's a story. I can't prove it. It's something that I was told. It's not like there's an inspector general who's investigating it. So it's an anecdote, and I've never said, like, trust me, bro, and believe everything that I say. So I just
Sean
wanted to put
Kirkpatrick
that forward
does.
first. Yeah, and he's gone down big style in my estimation. But I mean, as far as the story goes, that I put the Daily Mail, I can't really say much more than I did. It was that I spoke to RAF aircrew, interceptor pilots and navigators, and they told me that that they'd been tasked with intercept of a UAP and to bring it down, and that at times when they were beyond visual range, so beyond 20 nautical miles, they couldn't pick it up on their airborne radars. But the ground control radar did, and then later they were closer to the two objects, and the ground control radar, the ground intercept officer, he lost it on his scope, and his the ground radar is obviously like more powerful, and that's it. It's sort of the Daily Mail story, and I can't really add much to it. They tried to shoot these things down with radar homing and then infrared homing missiles, and then with the internal cannon that the aircraft had, and it was unsuccessful. It kind of reminded me in later years. I mean, I didn't really think a lot of it at the time. I didn't dismiss it. I just kind of put it into a compartment in my head. But it was really when I was reading about the 1980 case in Peru, when that Sukhoi pilot he fired, I think, 600 rounds into this object that was floating over his airbase and trying to bring it down. He said the rounds impacted it and absolutely nothing happened to it. And he says, "Oh, I believe that I was one of the first guys to have air-to-air combat with the UAP." With a UFO, as he said in Spanish. So yeah, I just want to reiterate again, these are stories, anecdotes that I have. I can't provide any proof for them, and I've never said to anybody, "Hey, believe me, it's like it's gospel." But it's funny because you'll get some people like in remarks who are what I'd call sort of Bible bashers, kind of like overly religious, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they'll believe in God, but yet they won't open their mind to the possibility that there may be kind of like other beings, whether they're from another planet or another dimension or another time. They won't open their minds to that, but but the Bible is gospel, right?
And remind me, you were on an AWAX talking to these folks, or did I misunderstand?
No. That was a separate occasion. I mean, flying on AWAX was like another job that I did, which is interesting.
And and tell us a bit about that. And here's a photo of the AWAX for those here that have no idea what it is. So what is an AWAX?
It's basically an airborne warning control aircraft. So from the AWACS, it's a very powerful airborne radar system. So you can literally see, it's like hundreds of kilometers in every direction, and it's generally used for airspace surveillance and also to vector in sort of to aircraft on intercepts. So there's sort of two main jobs that it does. But yeah, that was very interesting, and they live very well. The RAF as well; they live better than the Army.
I would, that wouldn't surprise me. So, in your discussion with aircrew while on your missions with AWACS, but I can't talk. On
no,
AWACS,
nothing came up there, mate. Nothing did.
There. Got it.
Well, no,
okay.
it's just, you'd imagine. I mean, there was a lot going on at that time. I mean, there was Russia. This was early 90s, so Russia was still a threat, even though the wall had come down. They nearly had a civil war there and a coup. So Russia was still a threat. They were still trying to penetrate the UK air defense region. Ukraine was on the side of was very pally with Russia then, and that their aircraft that they were presenting a sort of an espionage threat. And then you had a war going on in Bosnia Herzegovina. So plus everything else going on around the world. You just had the first Gulf War. So, it's not like people were going around thinking about UAP every day. It really kind of like wasn't on our radar, no pun intended. We were just, every day you've got focused tasks to take care of.
Now, I mentioned earlier about as far as actually backing up a bit. So we've heard from multiple sources that presidents of the United States, certain presidents have not been read into either the existence of UAP or certainly the crash retrieval and back engineering program, which completely blows me away that the person who essentially is in charge of conducting foreign policy on behalf of the country isn't briefed on certain things. I'm curious, is this Have you heard of the same sort of thing with, say, like the royal family or your prime ministers not being read into this kind of stuff?
No, I haven't. I mean, in terms of sort of tactical and operational intelligence, the prime ministers and the it's not going to get into the minutiae of things. The Minister of Defence might do. I know that the royal family had members of the royal family have an interest in UAP or had an interest in UAP, like Prince Philip. But I haven't been aware. It doesn't surprise me at all in the United States that happened. I think very much that the certain members of the intelligence community and the defense community, they kind of like regard politicians as kind of like caretakers for like 3 or 4 years, and that's it, and then you're out. So they're the kind of long-term guardians, and you don't have a need to know.
Yeah,
But I think, just a personal opinion. Obviously, it's for Americans to decide what their president should know, right? The American people. But I think if it's something as momentous as like UAP and the existence of entities that are non-human or maybe very advanced humans, ultra-terrestrials, then I think that the president should definitely know about it, because it's the most important thing probably that's ever happened in the world.
I absolutely do not understand how you can have a functioning democracy, no matter what country, when you've got a group of intelligence officials or 50-ish or so career bureaucrats that decide for themselves that Congress, and just speaking about our political system, that people in Congress and our presidents are just temporary employees, and they are in a need to know, and they don't need to know about this. It just absolutely blows me away. So let's say the royal family, if they're interested in it, do they have the ability to demand to be given intelligence product about that? Can they be read into it if they ask? Or like in our country, president can do that, and the CIA somehow can say no.
Well, that's actually a very good question. I mean, King Charles, His Majesty King Charles, is the head of state, and he's the head of state. He appoints the prime minister effectively once the prime minister has won a majority or is able to form a government. And as head of state and as head of the military, I mean, potentially he could order the head of defense intelligence, the head of MI6, or whoever's involved, to provide him with such information. But I think it would breach convention to do so, because the king isn't involved in the day-to-day running of either the military or the intelligence services, or in the day-to-day running of government. The prime minister will visit the king once a week. The king is there to guide the prime minister effectively, and the government, it's His Majesty's government, right? So it's in the king's name. But it's the prime minister who, effectively the chief executive. So I think it would go against convention for the king to do that. But potentially, I mean, if he ordered the head of defense intelligence and the head of MI6 and the head of GCHQ, and he said, right, I want on my desk by Friday, I want to know everything that the UK knows about UAP, then then they would have to do so.
I would certainly hope so. Now, looking at how the UK, from just being an American here and looking across the pond, it seems to me, just at least from an optics point of view, that there is a lot less in terms of the UAP issue, with the exception of the Daily Mail. They've really been stepping up, and Christopher Sharp, who's a friend of the show, and Josh Boswell, they've been really doing great work. But as just kind of almost like an apples and oranges thing, it seems like there is less talk of the UAP issue from government channels in the UK as opposed to the US. Why is that, or is it a misconception on my part?
No, not at all. I mean, the last time that the government kind of commented on it, I think there was in the article for the Daily Mail, they said, like, we don't have any artifacts. But it was in 2021. It was then Minister of State for Defense, which is the minister who sits one below the Minister of Defense. The Minister of State for Defense is like a more junior defense minister, and said that that they had no report. They don't hold any report on UAP. That they had no plans to have a UAP investigation project on the lines of the Americans, and that they continue to monitor threats to the United Kingdom. And if you look back in sort of reports like pre-Project Condign, pre-2000, in like the late 1990s, I think a lot of the preoccupation with defense intelligence, you had different branches of defense intelligence. You had like DI-55, which was interested in anything that was coming into the atmosphere because they wanted to know, so they were interested in UAP. But then you had other branches of defense intelligence, which was like, look, this is post-Cold War. Britain is now we're downsizing our military. There's limited resources, and we don't want to commit resources to this UAP thing because it's not an immediate threat. We've got bigger fish to fry, and the public's on us the whole time, and also MPs are demanding things from us the whole time. So it's much better if we can just say, look, we don't hold reports on that or UAP. What we've got, we'll just emit to the public. And then that will get people off our back. And then we don't have to have a phone line anymore. And we don't have to process public UAP reports, which ties up people and resources and also opens up the Ministry of Defense and Defense Intelligence, the Ministry of Defense to, potentially, embarrassing questions. So I think they just wanted to get it off their plate. Whereas other parts of defense intelligence were more interested in it and were like, actually, yeah, there is something going on here. And, when we look later at Project Condign, the report, UAP in the UK air defense region, we can actually see how British military intelligence was thinking in terms of like the threat and technological advantages that might be accrued from UAP technology. So there was different facets to defense intelligence in terms of the UAP issue. In terms of MPs, again, I mean, if you look now, I mean, the politics in the UK, the Conservative Party is absolutely in crisis. The Labour Party is like not much better. They've got a lot of other things to do. They've made an absolute disaster, an absolute dog's dinner of Brexit. You've got Northern Ireland looking like it's got a majority now, maybe potentially for people who want to leave and join the Republic of Ireland. You've got the Scottish nationalists, even though they've been doing really badly. But that was another can of worm opened after Brexit. So the Conservative Party, they've got all these major kind of internal divisions and scandals, and they're looking absolutely ridiculous. The economy is kind of like nosedived after Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine, all the rest of it, and they're worried that they're not going to get re-elected. So I think politicians, the average member of Parliament and MP, they've just got a member of the government, member of the cabinet, they've just got a lot more on their plate now than UAP. So that's another reason. And I think the main reason is just they're going to follow the American example on this.
And that's part of the whole Five Eyes thing, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Five Eyes being the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. But then also you've got Five Eyes Plus. You've got different countries that have strategic relationships with America or with members of the Five Eyes. So got like an extended Five Eyes as well.
What I don't understand, and there was the Air Force Secretary here, Frank Kendall, United States Air Force Secretary. He was on, I think it was one of our morning shows, national morning shows, might have been Good Morning America or something like that. And I think he was appearing, it was a big anniversary of the United States Air Force. And the host, the host asked about the UAP issue. And I wish I had the clip, because I would play it. But essentially what he said was really what you just touched on. He said, well, we don't consider this a national security threat or something along that line. And what just absolutely boggles my mind is how can something operating within your airspace, violating your air defense identification zones, hovering above our nuclear assets, disabling land-based strategic nuclear deterrent. How is that not a national security threat? I understand there are obviously fires burning right here and right now. You spoke about Ukraine and with what's going on with Israel and whatnot. So there clearly are other areas, but I just don't buy this whole line that you hear from defense officials that this is nothing to be concerned about.
Well, I agree. And I also think that there's two facets to that, because if you have these objects are able to enter, airspace, sea space, outer space, effectively, in Earth orbit with impunity, then, and, play with, your most advanced aerial platforms and effectively shut down nukes and things like that, not just in the USA, but also like in Russia, former Soviet Union, then that is incredibly worrying. And the other facet to that as well as Eric Davis said, in an interview which I had in my first paper, and what they were looking at in ORSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. This in 2008, we need to look to 2050 and extrapolate our American technology, American physics, American engineering forward to 2050 to be able to approximate the capability of the Tic Tacs, read for Tic Tac UAP, in case the UAP decide to be hostile. And the other side of the coin of that is if you look at Xi Jinping in China, by 2049, he wants to complete the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people, which is for China to be the #1 economic, technological, military, and political actor in the world. So, I'm sure the Chinese are interested in UAP because that would fit in with their goals of achieving their great, their great rejuvenation by 2049. So the two goals aren't mutually exclusive. But I think if you're a general, like you're in CENTCOM, you're head of CENTCOM or whatever, then you're looking at like, what assets have I got now, and what assets will I have to meet into the future, to deal with the likes of of Iran, the Houthis, and the same for the commander of the Pacific forces. So there are these fires burning, and we could be in high intensity warfare very, very quickly. You have to look at Ukraine. Just recently, there was a Russian missile has overflown Polish territory. Intruded into their airspace effectively. You've got NATO aircraft, NATO warships, and NATO ground forces in very close proximity with Russian ones, and also the same the Americans and their allies in proximity with Chinese ones, and with tinder boxes that are either already burning well or could very much burn with a spark. So that's going to be worrying military commanders right now. And also, a lot of them would have been read into the UAP issue. So they might have an idea, but it's not something that is going to be on their radar like every day. In my first paper, I spoke to this, you can look in the first paper, this consultant. She was a senior civilian advisor to the chief of staff of the Air Force. And then she was a senior civilian advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And when I talked to her about UAP, she was like, she was a professor of war studies as well, and a director at the Mitchell Aerospace Institute. So she was like, no, I think they're probably going to be like either black programs or some very advanced black program. So, but then when my paper came out, and then once the legislation started and the congressional kind of inquiry started, she kind of looked at me and she said, "Oh, actually, it looks like there is something to it." So wow. even people who are very highly cleared, if they're not cleared to the UAP issue, it's not going to be on their radar. Is basically what I'm trying to say. It
was interesting. There's a contact that I have that has trying to think how to describe this person. So this person has been intricately involved in forming U.S. nuclear policy in terms of U.S. nuclear forces, and testifies often. Well, this person actually is retired now, but just recently, but testified often to Congress in closed door sessions and whatnot. And I've been a student of U.S. and Russian nuclear policy since the early 90s. And I brought this up to the UAP issue to this person, and just said, "What do you think about it?" And all the person would say is, "I've got bigger things to worry about right now in terms of nuclear policy than UAPs and nukes." So, and obviously this person wouldn't elaborate any further, but the indication that I got was that this person was aware of the situation, but again, there were bigger fish to fry at the moment. And sometimes I wonder too if, and I was thinking about this before we came on air, is like, I wonder if the people in intelligence or whoever that know as much as anyone knows about any of this, is if they've come to the determination that this has been which I believe is true, this has been around for millions of years, thousands of years, or whatever, and that up until now there's been no indication of any sort of hostile intent. So sometimes I wonder if they think about it from the lens of, well, look, nothing has happened in 1,000 years and these things have been here, so probably nothing's going to happen for another 100, 200, 300 years. And that is where they come from by saying, well, it's no threat. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
There was actually, I've just got this a a secret level report from British Defence Intelligence, which actually answers that. And it says, and this is a Brit intelligence guy talking. He said, the second critical question is, do UAPs represent a possible threat to the defence of the realm? We could debate that, assuming for the sake of argument that something exists. Then it says they've never shown any hostile intent and therefore cannot represent a threat. And then, but then it goes, however, Russian aircraft attempting to penetrate the UK air defence region in the Cold War never showed hostile intent, but they certainly represented a threat. Thus, the only logical conclusion that we can come to is that we don't know if UAPs represent a threat to the defence of the realm. We cannot eliminate the possibility.
Totally makes sense. I don't think that burying your head in the sand with anything regarding national security has ever been a really good idea. That is for sure. Now, again, knowing very little about the UAP issue, period. Again, my knowledge of this whole thing is kind of like a piece of Swiss cheese with a bunch of holes in it. And it certainly is very little regarding what has gone on in the UK. But I understand that there was a study done in the UK. I think it was called Project Condign or something of that nature. And you have some slides about that you wanted to show.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it'll put into context as well the story in the Daily Mail, in which I was interviewed for. So I just wanted to put it in context, and also it's a fascinating bit of sort of British intelligence and British UAP history. And although the report has its detractors, and I think the guy writing the report definitely wasn't a fan of UFOs or people who are into UAP.
Sounds like Sean Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, but actually, if you read the report, I think he's a lot more open-minded. And why I wanted to share the report was actually, while people are listening in, to actually compare it to what Sean Kirkpatrick has said, and also compare it to the previous ODNI reports, and then also, to what ATIP was doing, and also ORSAP, because I've got a lot more time for what ORSAP and ATIP did personally, but it's useful to look at how the Brits were thinking, because this was in. This report, they started writing the report, I think, in 1998. In 1997, they identified, that they needed to find out more about UAP. So this report was produced for Defence Intelligence in the UK in December 2000, and then part of the report was released in 2006, and then different parts were released after that. More UAP reports from the Ministry of Defence were released after that. But it's fascinating to compare it. What the Brits were saying in 2000 to within military intelligence, defense intelligence, to what the Americans have said since then.
Well, let's dig into it here, and I'll bring it up, and then you can kind of walk us through this. So
okay.
So I've got it up on the screen here. This is your PowerPoint, I believe.
Yeah. So, hang on. Am I sharing? Am I being shared?
Yeah. Your screen is up right now.
Yeah, so this is the Project Condign report, unidentified phenomena in the UK air defence region. And the first thing it says is fascinating. That UAP exists is indisputable. And then it said, they can hover, land, take off, produce exceptional velocities, vanish. And it says they exhibit characteristics well beyond those of any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. Right. So that's a pretty amazing statement right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then the kind of overall aim of the report was one, to determine that if UAP reporting was valuable to defence intelligence, and then secondly, whether there was any evidence of a threat to the United Kingdom, and then also from that, in an enterprising way, to identify any potential sort of military tech that might be of interest from UAP, or from adversaries. Okay. So if you go to the next one. Sorry, somehow you're not panicked. Yeah, there we go. So this is the guy who wrote the report, Dr. Ron Haddow. He'd actually been in the Royal Air Force as aircrew. He was an expert in electronic warfare, radar, and air defense and guided weapons. If you look at the bit at the bottom of the screen, he'd actually worked for Marconi, which is now part of BAE Systems. He'd been a professor at the Royal Military College of Science, and you can actually see his doctoral thesis on the screen, where he's talking about the probability of detecting and tracking radar targets in clutter at low grazing angles. So he's basically looking at the effectiveness of radar. The guy's like, he's a missile and radar scientist. Okay. So they picked the right guy for the report. So in terms of reporting, then this is, don't forget, this is in 2000. So he's saying that, that there's some 30 years of reports are held, and that basically what they're going to do is have a study and look at UAP reports from the period 1987 and 1997. This is the UK scatter plot, which actually comes out the report. And I just say, if anybody, I'm just doing like an overview of the report, but if anybody wants to download it, go to look up UAP National Archives UK, and you'll get a link. And it's basically like a 400-page document. And there's about, I don't know, there's about 15 or 20 PDFs that you have to download. So this is the scatter plot that they were looking at, UAP sightings within that time period. This is the unit UK Defence Intelligence 55 that was interested. So this is one of the conclusions that they say, it leads to the conclusion that UAP don't have any defence intelligence value. However, the study has found a number of technological issues that might be of potential interest. So then they're talking about, for military use, they're talking about, radio frequency weapons, impulse radars, radar signature reduction, radar reflecting decoys. So these are all things that have been of interest to the Americans as well. And then it says recommended further investigation to see if these could have potential military applications. Now, you can see this part of the report was secret, and that's why it's all like XXX. It's all redacted. Then they talk about hostile powers. So it's saying that because this is quite interesting. If you just the phenomenon can cause radar alarms and visual distractions, that there might be possible military applications that hostile power could use as some kind of decoy or countermeasure. So here they're worried about UAP potentially being manipulated by hostile powers to gain a strategic advantage.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah, and that was something actually that happened, in the 1950s. The Americans, the CIA, they were worried that, and the US Air Force, they were worried that, that communication channels and panic, and that the whole system might be overloaded by UAP, and that might detract from, like a Russian nuclear strike. So flight safety risk, this is something obviously that we've heard a lot about in the US. So it's trying to assess, the possibility of having accidents against both military and civilian aircraft in the UK. This is where it gets very interesting. So we're talking about air threats, the UK air defence region. So normally you talk about this in terms of hostile powers. So the Brits basically saying here, defence intelligence are saying, and think about this, what I'm going to say, think about this in terms of the last reports that we've had from ODNI, what Aero have been saying. So the Brits in 2000 would consider a threat to exist if air objects could successfully penetrate the UK air defence region. Secondly, if they could produce damage in the form of physical or electronic effects, if there was an air hazard like collision or any incidents with civil and military traffic. Then the next one was there'd be a threat if objects within the airspace were hostile, and if challenged, they were invulnerable to radar tracking and could outmaneuver both ground and air-based defense systems. And then the last point is controlled objects would enter and leave the UK air defence region having possibly obtained intelligence like imagery, electronic intelligence, communications intelligence, signals intelligence. So that's very interesting if you relate that to American reports. I think basically this report in 2000 is a lot more forthcoming in many ways than the American reports that we've been seeing.
That is for sure.
Just let me move this. Yeah, and then air threats. So then they wanted to assess if the UK air defence region had been breached by hostile flying objects, and also determine what this might reveal about the military capabilities of other countries. So again, the terrestrial adversary, and then ascertain if there's any technical information that would be useful to the Brits. So in air threats, so try to discover if events seen by witnesses and apparently sometimes visible to radar can be classified as a threat. And that's quite interesting where it says that there's objects that may or not be a threat that can enter and leave the UK air defence region and are invulnerable to our current air defences. So here they're talking about the necessity of basically the studying the capabilities of the UK Air Defence Region surface and airborne sensors with regards to the UAP. And that's quite interesting, but they say there's no reports of RAF aircraft intercepting UAP. And now I find that kind of weird. Okay, that's between they're talking 1987 to 97.
Okay.
But we know that in the 1950s, the 1960s, there were a number of incidents where where UAP were reported to both have entered the UK Air Defence Region and also have attempted intercepts. And if you look at the Royal Mail article, there's actually two incidents from 1957 and 1962 where American aircrew are talking about intercepting UAP in British airspace. Okay, that's quite interesting. No intercepts by the RAF.
That is, but even just like what you've been showing, so far feels so much more thorough. Feels like it's being taken seriously as opposed to what Kirkpatrick has been putting out, which is really just a bunch of garbage. I mean, this is really, from how it looks to me, like a completely, night and day difference. I mean, this is professional, it's factual versus the stuff out of Sean Kirkpatrick and Arrow is all trust me, bro.
Yeah, but I think we have to draw the distinction that this was a classified report, UKI's secret. Some of it was classified, restricted UKI's only, but like all the stuff on the radars, the radar capabilities, that was all secret. So this was behind closed doors, what Defence Intelligence was telling to itself, and which later got released to the public. Whereas I think with Sean Kirkpatrick, that seems to be that there's probably one thing going on behind closed doors and a completely different thing being told to the public. Right?
Got it. Okay, let's we'll go back to your presentation here. So
yeah, no worries. So then again, they're saying there's no evidence of the penetration of UK airspace by unauthorized air platforms. And this is when it gets interesting. It says there's no artifacts or unknown or explained origin that have been reported or handed into UK authorities. And then it also says there's no signals intelligence, no electronic intelligence, radiation measurements, and little useful video imagery intelligence. So that's very fascinating, quite there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then it's saying, again, it says no one in the UK or credibly in the wide world has ever produced an artifact or proven non-terrestrial origin. So that's another interesting observation there within the bounds of what they knew at that time that they wrote the report. Not even small artifacts have been left on Earth to confirm the existence of a spacecraft or other materials. None have apparently ever crashed. No proven tangible artifacts have been obtained by the public for display or shown by governments to exist. The Ministry of Defence does not hold any such material. So wow. Then they start looking at the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So they're saying there's no firm evidence that there's life of somewhere elsewhere in the universe. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And then they say, well, it could be beyond our current sensor capabilities. Although we know from the American reports that they're not, because if we look at like the Nimitz case, things like that, and other cases, we know that our sensors are very capable. American sensors, NATO sensors, Five Eyes sensors are. And then they're saying that they don't believe that there's.
Sorry, I just want to jump. Sorry, let me just jump in real quick. Hearing some comments, sure. People are noting that the audio is cutting out, and usually I blame it on Big Daddy Ronald Moultrie and the NSA screwing with our show. But in this case, you're actually out in the middle of the country, and the internet is not very good.
Yeah, it's my crappy internet. I'm really sorry about that. Literally, 4 days ago, a tree fell down in the garden and like chopped the cable. And it's only like a copper cable. It's not like Gucci fiber optic, right? So that's what happened with it.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So it's not Ronald Moultrie effing with the show. So anyway,
no.
I just want to throw that back in there. Okay, here we go. So back to your presentation. So extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Yeah. So they're saying they don't believe there's intelligent control being displayed. There's no indication that craft of extraterrestrial origin exists. And then, so that's quite interesting. Then they're talking about observables, and they're saying that in terms of the observables that have been reported, these are technologies and science which are basically beyond anything, beyond the far-term aspirations of any aerospace industry on Earth, right? So that's quite interesting. Then they're talking about intergalactic travel, etc. Yeah, again, maneuver capability significantly beyond our current capability, not necessarily always seen on radar, exhibit characteristics on occasions which have been described as intelligent. And then, very interestingly, at the bottom, they're talking about effects, saying at worst, close range exposure to UAP can cause disturbing mental and physical effects and can affect electronics and electrics. So that is very fascinating.
That is.
And also, I mean, what we've been seeing, more and more in the UAP literature, from sort of reputable researchers. So I think these guys, they're kind of on the ball with their report so far. Then again, they're saying that this technology is beyond the limit of current human design and engineering capability, which chimes with what Dr. Eric Davis said in 2008. Was thinking about in 2008. And they're saying, or even field types not yet discovered on Earth. They talk about exotic materials, and then this bit at the top. I mean, to me, that they're saying metamaterials, the materials and structures, the properties of which appear to be exceptional. And then they're talking about they would require special cooling, shaping, layering, sandwiching, which we do not currently possess. So that to me says metamaterials, right?
Yeah. If they didn't have it, how would they be able to write this language if they didn't have these in their possession?
I'm not so sure that that's the point there. I think this is a scientist. This is a radar expert who's saying that they would need to have these metamaterials. I don't think he's hinting or that we should construe that they had these materials. I think this is just a scientist putting forward his logical view. Then again, they talk about radar echoing. Again, he's a radar expert. Then again, they're saying technologies beyond the level understood on Earth. And then again, this is quite interesting. At the bottom, it says, at the very least, a manned craft would imply survivability during repeated exceptional accelerations, decelerations, and maneuvers. So, i.e. not being turned into Swiss cheese. But they also talk about manned or unmanned, which again is interesting. Right, now this is where there's a section report, and this report is like, I don't know, it's like 400 something pages long, but there's so many nuggets in it. So here they're talking about, this is the UK Defense Intelligence talking about the Russians. Now the Russians are saying, this guy Sokolov, who ran one of their programs, saying, we had 40 cases where pilots encountered UFOs. They said this happened 3 times, twice the pilots died. The pilots, i.e. the Russian pilots, viewed UFOs as a definite threat. And then Sokolov, right, the Russian, he says the military were interested in UFOs because if the secrets of the UFO could be basically, discerned, they will be able to win competition against prospective enemies by using the technology. So exactly what the Brits are looking at, the Russians are looking at.
Right.
And then at the bottom in red, I put this point, and this is my own viewpoint. I said, this is UK interest in principal adversary experience with UAP, because the Russians at that time, the Cold War's just ended, but the Russians are still a major threat. They're still sending aircraft to try and penetrate the UK air defense region. So if the Russians have been having problem with UAP and losing aircraft and blokes, then the Brits are going to be interested in that, because the Russian former Soviet Air Force is still a major threat to the UK. And then again, talking about exotic tech. Hang on, I think we've seen that one. Sorry, I went up instead of down. Yeah, then again, this is the UK. They're saying there's evidence the Soviet Union has taken a particular interest in UAP. Then again, they're talking about radio frequency weapons, impulse radars, and yeah, basically being able to harness the technology of UAP. Now, this is very interesting. This is also a report, because the Brits were looking not just at the Russians, but they looked at China. And here, in this case, they looked at Finland. So this is a report from Finland. And they say, a report from Finland, 1977, which involved troops on the Finnish border, reported radio frequency equipment jammed. And it says, and no telephones, whatever that means. And that's interesting, because Finland now is part of NATO. And just across the border in Russia, you've got the Polar Peninsula, which is also you've got their headquarters of the Northern Fleet, where they've got ballistic missile submarines, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very, very interesting. I would imagine, because the Finns have got very, very capable electronic intelligence, which is communications intelligence, signals intelligence capabilities. So I would imagine that for years and years, they've been hoovering up Russian emissions, including, I would expect, evidence that the Russians have been having problems with UAP. That's just my take. Also, they talk about Hesdalen, which is really fascinating. Don't forget, this report's in 2000. So it's saying the Hesdalen phenomenon and the project was linked with the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment. And if anybody's interested, go in. I can't remember where it is in the report, but go into the report. And there's a whole page on Hesdalen and what they were doing, like as of kind of 2000.
And what is that? Can you just kind of? That's the first time I've ever heard of it.
Hesdalen is that region in Norway, kind of that valley where you've got like kind of like tears in the sky opening up, and people think that there are portals and there's orbs being seen and all kinds of like weird and wonderful activity. So it's like a UFO hotspot. It's like a Skinwalker Ranch in Norway type thing. But it's interesting that British Defence Intelligence was talking about this in a report issued in December 2000 within British intelligence circles. We're nearly at the end of this now. So they said, okay, so they've done their study. They said there's no evidence of intelligent control of the objects or alleged inspections of UK strategic assets. UK strategic assets being air-launched bombs, okay, aircraft capable of carrying nukes, and also nuclear submarines, both hunter-killer and boomers. And then it says, okay, so they concluded that although you've got UFOs appearing regularly in the UK defence region, there's no hostile threat. They do not belong to another nation, and there's no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. And then they say, they kind of give a bit of a debunk. They say, in some cases, their connection with meteors. But it's a very thorough report because they look at like plasmas, they look at planets, they look at like kites and hang gliders. You know, they look at the whole kind of panoply of what UAP could be confused with. Yeah, just as the Americans have done.
And it sounds like just what you've been reading so far that it sounds like they're really not offering up any prosaic explanations.
Well, no, I mean, I've just picked up the juicy bits, but if you look in the report, I mean, there's pages and pages of them talking about balloons and plasmas and, fake false radar echoes and things like that. So I've just picked out the juicy bits, the juicy open-minded bits. Because I mean, if you go through it, it's like over 400 pages. It'll be doing your head in by the end of it. Trust me. So that's why I just picked out the juicy bits. Then they've come.
I about did my head in after reading Kirkpatrick's historical report. What a piece of shit that was. Anyway,
yeah, which is why I thought I'd share this because this is a lot more interesting and fun, isn't it?
Yeah. So, for sure.
So then they say, blah blah blah. So defense intelligence interests will not be furthered by continued investigations, which focus on potential extraterrestrial sources. Okay, so then they're saying it should no longer be a requirement for DI5 to monitor UAP reports as they do not provide useful information to defense intelligence. So that to me is saying, okay, so now we've got rid of the public, we've got the members of parliament off our back. We can now refocus these resources on like real everyday military threats, right? But then again, this is where it gets interesting. If you look down the bottom, it says no attempt should be made to outmaneuver a UAP during interception.
which begs to question, why would they put that in there?
Yeah. Why would they put that in there? I think, though, that they're talking more about, I mean, are they talking about UAP, which are like non-human, or are they talking about something that's, you know, could be like a Chinese lantern or I don't know. I don't know. Then again, don't chase UAP. Following the Russian experience, it would be prudent to avoid trying to chase UAPs. And the next one, no attempt should be made to outmaneuver a UAP during intersection. So they're talking about the possibility of RAF or American craft they're talking about RAF aircraft because it's a UK eyes only document. So saying no attempt should be made to outmaneuver a UAP during interception. And then pilots should be advised not to maneuver other than to place the object astern if possible. Right? So put it behind you and get out of it.
Wow.
That's the end.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that seems to have run rings around the work of Sean Kirkpatrick and Arrow. That is for sure. That's and I would like to read the whole thing, but you're saying that a lot of the what is in that 400-page report does seem to debunk it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and other researchers who've looked at it, there's a researcher, Dr. David Clark, who's a very, very interesting guy. He was actually involved in the original kind of release of the papers. So he's done a lot of work on it. His work is definitely worth following. He's got a website. Other researchers, we think that it was basically a case of they had the conclusion that they wanted to reach. And that was kind of like a foregone conclusion, and that they just wanted to get rid of this issue. They just wanted to get it off the plate of defense intelligence and reallocate resources to kind of everyday military threats.
Understood. Okay, so let's talk about the article in the Daily Mail by Josh Boswell and Chris Sharp. So it says here, exclusive veteran paratrooper reveals British Special Forces recovered a downed non-human craft in northern England in the late 1980s, supporting recent U.S. whistleblowers' claims of a secret UFO crash retrieval program. Now, for those of us that have not read the article, and I'm pretty sure most of us have, if you don't mind, walk us through that entire story.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is told to me by a guy that I knew after the military. I vetted him. He claimed to be a member of a unit that used to be called the Increment, later known as E Squadron, SAS, which recruits, and this is all open source. You can look up UK Special Forces, a website. So everything from the article came from that. They do basically, they're a tier 1 unit that do the highest risk jobs, deniable, both clandestine, covert, and paramilitary operations around the world for MI6 and defense intelligence. And they recruit from the most experienced blokes. Usually in the British military, you have to have been in the military for at least 3 years before you can apply for special forces. So then these guys are going to be recruiting guys who've been in special forces at least 3 or 4 years. The most reliable and the most capable blokes and experienced blokes. And not just from SAS, but also from the Special Boat Service, and also from the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, which is Britain's elite reconnaissance regiment. So the story was told me by this guy, and all I can say is it's a story, it's an anecdote. I can't prove it. It's not under investigation by an inspector general like Grash, United States. So please don't consider this to be manna from heaven. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling a story. This guy says that he was involved in a crash retrieval in the UK, and that they were deployed. That they found a craft. He didn't tell me what it looked like. He just said it was obvious that there'd been occupants. And I don't know if that meant that they saw seats inside, or they found a dead alien, or whatever it was. I don't know. He said it was obvious that the occupants had basically gone off along the ground, and then it became an operation to basically, they coordinated and controlled the craft, and then now it was a case of protecting, securing the craft and recovering these occupants for to take them into custody. He didn't tell me what happened. I didn't ask. It was one conversation that we had. One night, and he didn't ask. I didn't ask him about it after that, and he didn't repeat it. I didn't ask any further questions. But then, to be honest, I wasn't like majorly into the UAP topic then. So it was just something that I kind of like put on the back burner. And it wasn't until I started getting back into the UAP topic in a big way from sort of 2016 that this kind of really came back into my memory. Once I was reading like lots of UAP reports, and once people like Grush started coming forward. So that's really where we're at with that story. I mean, people have a look, and I say it's a story, it's not gospel. Have a look at the story, and also once this is why I did the presentation as well, so that people would have an idea of something that they could relate to in terms of the story and like the UK history behind it. If you look at, again, the UK Minister of Defence in 2021, she's saying that the UK holds no reports, but they're constantly monitoring UK airspace. So in over 50 years, there's no such reporting has indicated the existence of any military threat from UAP. So you relate that, but back in 2000, they were saying the existence of unexplained aerial phenomena is indisputable. So, people have got to make their own minds up.
Do you think that you will run into this guy again? Is this something you would feel comfortable asking for more detail, or do you think it's kind of one of those things, he told you, it's over, probably not a good idea to ping him about it again?
No, I wouldn't ping him about it again. I wouldn't ping him about it again. I mean, look, people tell you when you've been in the military, people tell you, about their experiences, that you share experiences. It's not because they're trying to big themselves up or because they're boasting about something. I mean, this is like, one of the most capable guys I've ever met. And I've been around like SAS blokes and special forces blokes and paratroopers all my life, right? So I know the guy's not a bullshitter, and I know people who knew him, both who I'd been in the military with and he'd been in the military with, because that world is a small world. But people need to get things off their chest. I mean, for example, I know people who've been in the Falklands, right, in the Falklands War, and they fought some of the most bloody engagements, absolutely dreadful, like, World War One, fighting through trenches with bayonets fixed. And you've got nobody to talk to about it. You don't want to overload your wife and your family with it, but you will talk to other military blokes about it. And they didn't give you shrinks when you came back. They didn't give you any kind of like any kind of download when you came back, or decompression, as they did, during Afghanistan. Maybe they give you like, 3 or 4 days in Cyprus, where you could go on the beer big time, and before they unleashed you back onto the UK civilian population. But like, for example, these guys come back from the Falklands. They didn't have any decompression, any kind of psychological or psychiatric help. So, people want to talk to you about things that really stress them, because you can't, go through life with these things bottled up. And, many veterans will only want to talk to other veterans, because only other veterans will understand what you've been through. And I think this thing really put the zap on his head at the time, because, this guy, wasn't fazed by anything. But I mean, this is without doubt probably the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him in his life, apart from, surviving many contacts with the enemy. Okay, because the guy's done many hotspots. But I mean, this is otherworldly or outerworldly stuff that you're dealing with. So I'd imagine, he got to the point where, he wanted to talk to somebody. But again, it's a story. I can validate him as a person, but I can't validate the story that he's telling me, because I haven't heard it from other people.
Of course. Now, in that Daily Mail article by Christopher Sharp and Josh Boswell, it had this executive summary in there. It also had that map that you displayed earlier. What is this executive summary telling us?
I mean, this is kind of like the boring part of the executive summary, apart from, where are we? Yeah, they've just put in like a Bucksheet page. And it's, I think the executive summary is about 23 pages long. But this is just like the boring part. I mean, I went through 400 pages and I highlighted like the interesting bits, and that's what you got in the presentation that I gave you. So there's a lot of, not fluff, but it's a military report. So they have to go through literally everything. So this isn't that interesting. It just looks to me like a filler that they've put in there.
Got it. Okay. That totally makes sense. Now, let's see here. So speaking of the Daily Mail, so I was involved, co-wrote an article with Christopher Sharp and Josh Boswell. This came out in November. It was exclusive. CIA's secret office has conducted UFO retrieval missions on at least 9 crashed sites around the world, whistleblowers reveal. The Office of Global Access, a wing of the CIA, has played a central role in collecting alien spacecraft since 2003, sources told us, writing this for the Daily Mail. I'm just curious, what was your reaction to this article? Did any of it resonate with you, what we wrote about?
Yeah, absolutely. Included the units involved. And actually, I did a podcast before that article came out, on the podcast Through a Glass Darkly with my mate Sean Hazlitt. It's on crash retrievals. If you just look crash retrievals, Franc Milburn, that will come up, and you'll see actually Sean and I are discussing the different units that would be involved. And I think we also discussed an operation that the Americans conducted in the 1980s, the late 1980s in Chad, where Chad was being supported by France, because the Libyans were mounting like major military operations inside northern Chad. And there was a Russian Mi-24 attack helicopter, like the Russian Afghan war vintage, that was captured by the French and the Chadians. And they handed them over to the Americans, and the Americans actually flew it out with a Chinook. They sort of disassembled it partly and then flew it out with Chinooks. So that's quite interesting. That's a true crash retrieval. And Sean and I also talk about the units that would be involved, both British units and American units. And again, this is all from open source, so that's worth checking out that episode. And that came out. But when the Daily Mail article came out, I thought, that resonates completely.
Had you heard of or been exposed to the Office of Global Access prior to the article?
No, I hadn't actually. No, but I mean, I know people who've been in, the sort of like the sort of special activity side of things in the agency.
And does it surprise you? Because to be honest, a lot of it did surprise me. And when we really started digging into it, what we discovered, frankly, was, for me at least, was shocking, just speaking for myself. But did it surprise you that the entire UFO issue, that whole portfolio is held by the CIA, and the crash recovery operation would be run out of Office of Global, their Office of Global Access? With what you know about how government secrecy works and how intelligence operations are structured, would it make sense that it would fall under their purview?
Well, yeah, because I mean, it's parallel to the Brits. I mean, if you look in the Daily Mail story, you've got E Squadron, formerly known as the Increment, Tier 1 unit of special operators who are the equivalent of CIA special activities, and run by MI6 and Defense Intelligence. So that's mirrored in the United States. The CIA, they've got their own guys that they recruit from JSOC, and they also have a symbiotic relationship with the Joint Special Operations Command, like SEAL Team 6, the operational, Delta Force, and also the Special Activities Division and the Air Force, special operations guys who work with them. So, the CIA have their own guys who can go in country and do retrievals, because they've recruited from the pool of people who do exactly that. And if you look at an ORBAT, an order of battle, for example, of Special Operations Command, never mind JSOC. JSOC's underneath Special Operations Command. But if you look at just at the US Air Force Special Operations, it's absolutely enormous. The amount of blokes they've got trained to go in country, tactical control guys, pararescue guys, they're fully geared up to retrieving aircraft and UAP and everything else. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, and I think that would fall under Air Force Special AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command.
Yeah. But can I just say as well, this is just my own personal belief, but from research that I've done, and I can't put any proof to this or anything, but I firmly believe that there will be teams, former JSOC level people who are working for aerospace and defense companies who also have their own aircraft and who are also able to deploy teams to effect retrievals of technologies. And I think that some of that might even be outsourced.
Well, and that was actually going to be one of my follow-up questions. One of the things that we were told by multiple sources is so there exists a space-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platform that is able to track UAP worldwide in real time, and of course this system is able to detect when these craft go down, and then when the craft goes down, the recovery operation is generated out of the Office of Global Access. And it is either split into one of two ways. It's either tasked to JSOC and whatever Tier 1 operators they have available, and what other additional assets, say from like the Department of Energy, that would be deployed with them, because one of the things that we understood was a lot of times these things are radiological. So the skill sets required by, say, like the nuclear emergency search and rescue team, in the skills required to, say, handle a loose nuclear warhead would be the same skill set needed to recover a UAP. Now, so OGA tasks some recovery operations to JSOC. But then the other thing that we found out, and again, these were from multiple sources, was that a good portion of them are tasked directly to private aerospace. So let's say Northrop Grumman, their security contractor is Blackwater, and Blackwater has a bunch of former Tier 1 operators that worked for JSOC. They are sending this group, they're giving the crash recovery to an aerospace corporation to conduct
Sorry,
go ahead.
sorry. Can we just hold on just a minute, please?
Yeah.
Just a minute, man.
Okay, so he'll be back in just a second. I know he's taking care of some family there. Anyway, yeah, it was really kind of mind blowing, and one of the things that we have certainly messaged to Congress is, who has oversight on this. So we found that again. Crash recovery operations were either going straight to JSOC, which is, of course, in the military, Joint Special Operations Command. That is the group that is in charge of what are called Tier 1 operators, Navy SEALs, etc. But then a certain portion are sent off to private aerospace to go and recover these vehicles. The thing that we were not able to determine was what the decision tree is, like why. So Office of Global Access decides to give some to JSOC, and of course they would recover it and bring it back to, I'm guessing, a government laboratory, Air Force Area 51. I mean, who knows? We weren't able to find anything in detail about that. But our question, which we were not able to find the answer to, is why were some of them sent to private aerospace? Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, please excuse me about that.
All good.
Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, so one of the things that we discovered was that some of these crash retrievals are sent specifically off to private aerospace as opposed to JSOC, which would then, of course, have the foreign materials in government custody. Any thoughts on why that would be? We were not able to discern, and we were not told how that decision was made, or why some was given to JSOC and why some was given to private aerospace.
Yeah, there'd be two reasons for that. I mean, one would be, plausible deniability, if you wanted to add like an extra level of secrecy. And the other one would be, tactical operational deployments, because, JSOC, SEAL Team 6, they're not just sitting around waiting for like a UAP to crash or be shot down. They've got other jobs to do as well, right? So they might be fully engaged, because you've got to think of like special forces unit. Say, just for example, say for argument's sake, and I'm not saying that these numbers involve, say you've got like 300 blokes in a unit, right? Okay. Not all of those blokes are going to be deployed at the same time, because you've got to have like rest periods, training periods, preparation periods, right? So if they're under a high tempo level of operations, like you've got blokes in Afghanistan, Iraq, and also like the rest of the world, then you'd need extra blokes. So if you've got 100,000 contractors, or who are former Special Operations Command, and maybe you've got like 10 or 20,000 of those who are former JSOC, then it would be logical to use them, because your own blokes are already committed to operations.
I didn't think about it from that perspective, but that completely makes sense. One of the other things that we were told as well is that there is we'll just say a rogue crew of JSOC operators whose part of their responsibility are dealing with the, how should I put this? The kinetic type things, for instance, wet works, intimidation of potential whistleblowers, etc. Does that surprise you? That I was a little bit surprised about, but everything that we received in the story were from very, very, very high sources. It wasn't like somebody just telling a story. We vetted this to death. So does that surprise you that JSOC would have a subset of special operators that could go and do the highly illegal things that they would be able to have no accountability with?
Well, are you talking former JSOC operators?
The way it was described was a rogue group, a rogue crew of JSOC operators. So I don't know if this was like a completely separate group that is not associated with JSOC, or if these were just former operators. But essentially it was still being conducted out of JSOC. So I don't know if it was operations that were spun out of JSOC to a private security contractor to do the dirty work, or that was something we had a difficult time really getting any further detail in. But would that surprise you that, or does that even seem feasible, I guess I would say, that those kinds of things, knocking people off, whatnot, would not be held under JSOC specifically?
Well, no, special operations. I mean, you're taking out, whether it's an enemy scientist, like the Israelis, we know that they've been taking out, scientists. Okay, so that's members of their intelligence and special forces who do that. JSOC, UK special forces around the world, and also units that are farmed out to work for military intelligence or the foreign intelligence service, whether it's CIA or MI6. They will be carrying out targeted assassinations of people who are threats to the security of their respective countries. In terms of a rogue JSOC unit, no, because rogue, to me, rogue means they're basically gone AWOL. They're not obeying orders. They're not disciplined. No, I think it would be more like, I'm saying I don't know 100%, right? I don't know gospel, but I'd say it'd be more likely, because don't forget the Defense Intelligence Agency, right? They've got their own paramilitary and foreign intelligence going on as well, right? As well as the CIA. So quite feasible that CIA and defense, the DIA, that they would subcontract those kind of jobs to former JSOC types.
Because the thing that makes me,
it would be UAP related, or if, for example, there's like a surge in tensions with China and Russia, you've got more foreign operatives suddenly appearing in the States. You don't have enough. You don't have enough trained guys to deal with them. So you're going to outsource some of it to contractors who you've worked with before. You know that they can do a good job. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily UAP related.
Sure. Like, I wonder, and I would have to dig into this more, if I would imagine that, and all I can speak about is here in the U.S., that there are laws in place that would prevent JSOC from carrying out kinetic operations on American citizens. I think it's, of course, one thing and probably expected dealing with a foreign adversary, but if you've got elements of JSOC that are taking out people that are American citizens or harassing them or whatnot, that's where I wonder if in order for that legally to occur and to have no sort of paper trail, that if they needed to do something in terms of an operation on an American citizen, that then they would spin that off to a contractor rather than having it be done by somebody that is an active member of JSOC.
Yeah, my research is that it's aerospace and defense companies, or certain aerospace and defense companies, that have carried out this harassment with very, very experienced former operators. We're talking like break-ins, hacking, poisoning, kidnappings, enhanced interrogation, use of directed energy weapons, which I've talked about before. I've done research into all of this, and I initially thought that it was a foreign hostile intelligence service, but then based on my sort of my period of study that I was looking at it over a period of years, there's no way that that amount of people could operate, foreign operatives. No way that they could operate that long in carrying out that sort of high tempo of operations, of harassment and everything else, and not be discovered by American domestic, counterintelligence and law enforcement agencies. So I came to the conclusion that it was, highly trained former special operators, and very likely employed by aerospace and defense companies. You remember in the military as well, there's still a thing called honor. People do actually believe in honor, even if you've had to kill a lot of people in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it is. So I think that you're more looking at people who are, happy to take a big payday, and who've been former special operators who do that kind of work, rather than dishonor yourself doing it. I don't see that anybody at JSOC would sully their reputations with that kind of work. And also I know from past experience that if you are a former member of like a tier 1 unit, right, and if you go and you work for the wrong people, whether it's like the cartels or something like that, if you bring if you go and sell what they teach you, helping basically scumbags that you were operating against before, you've got a good chance of getting topped yourself by your former mates.
Wow, that makes sense. So you've heard of this in terms of retaliation, kinetic retaliation against people of that. So this isn't just from a few sources. I take it this is something that there is quite a bit of history in this, from what you're saying.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back the 80 years of the phenomenon, whether it was Forrestal, James McDonald, right? There's a whole lot of people, Mark McCandlish, right? There's a whole lot of people who've died in very kind of suspicious circumstances. And I always thought, okay, that's kind of like UFO lore, conspiracy theory, whatever. But then once I started talking to people, people who work in sort of like white, open source, like who are interested in UAP propulsion technology, rocket scientists, people like that, and they're coming to me and telling me that they've been threatened or they've been basically held against their will, kidnapped, stuff like that, or had their vehicles messed with, or been hacked, or had their house robbed. Then you look at what Grush was saying. He was being intimidated by somebody, right? So it all kind of makes sense to me. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
Yeah, it totally does. There's actually a good friend of mine that is a former high-ranking official in the Trump administration, and this individual was hit with Havana syndrome. And this person deals with it to this day, and it's very, very sad. It's clear that the CIA is trying to cover that up. I'm a pretty liberal guy, Democrat, and have always been very trusting of the government. And the more and more that I've dug into this and spoken to people that have been involved with not just the UAP issue, but different elements of government. It's it is a mixed bag that I never would have thought of. But I feel this friend of mine is kind of at a bit of a loss because of the direction that the CIA is trying to spin this whole thing as far as the Havana syndrome. It is a real thing. This person who is highly intelligent, comes from an intelligence background. There's no way this person would be making it up. And it's very, very sad. So,
sorry, just on that point. I mean, I know somebody, a good mate of mine, who very, very intelligent guy, very, very technically minded. And he was at the Russian embassy, the American embassy in Moscow in the 1990s, and he said that no doubt in my mind there were the kind of emissions that were affecting people because he was there, looking at it. So no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
Any idea? Kind of veering a little bit off topic, but any idea why? Like, for instance, I know this individual did not, the UAP issue was not part of this person's security portfolio in the Trump administration. Any thoughts as far as why people were being targeted with Havana? It's clearly intentional.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a foreign operative, if you're a CIA operative or a DIA operative, and you're operating, you're meeting people like in downtown Havana, or it's a way of harassment, isn't it? It's kind of like it's gray zone warfare. You're not like shooting them with a 9mm pistol or a sniper rifle, or beating them up in the street. You're affecting the ability of intelligence officers and the embassy staff in general to be able to operate by whether you're using, like an acoustic weapon, or you're using a directed microwave weapon. Energy weapon, which will literally, kind of like, fry you inside, I guess, and fry your skin. I mean, I've got terrible pictures of what directed energy weapons have done to people. Pictures that the victims have actually sent to me. I've got videos of, multiple witnesses corroborating a directed energy weapon attack. People with burnt arms, with burnt legs, with swollen spines. With a long history of gastrointestinal disorders, because prolonged exposure to directed microwave energy, it's like putting yourself inside a microwave, right? You get cooked.
Yeah, the thing that was nuts about this, and I can't really go into detail, but this person that was hit with Havana was in Washington, D.C. at a government facility. And so it wasn't like this person was at a foreign embassy or on foreign soil. This was in Washington. Anyway, let's move on from there. So now you've been writing strategic and threat assessments for Fortune 500 companies and white papers for organizations such as the Middle East Economic Survey, the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, and the Institute for National Security Studies at Tel Aviv University. You also published 2 UAP reports for the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies on UAP, which have been cited by Dr. Hal Puthoff and Chris Mellon. How did these reports come about? How did you get into, or how did you move from working in the military circles into writing white papers for think tanks, and specifically these two papers, which I'll show an image of here in a second?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the stuff I did, for the sort of Middle East oriented think tanks and terrorism think tanks, that was just a natural outgrowth. I mean, I did international relations at the London School of Economics, so which was perfectly suited for when I was doing oil and gas security, managing oil and gas security for companies in places from the Iraq to North Africa. Studying the geopolitical risk. And then I thought, well, I've been operating in these countries. Why don't I start writing about what's actually going on there? Because I've been on the ground. I'm not some bloke sitting in a university in Lincoln or London. I've actually been on the ground and like lived it and breathed it and eaten the food. So that's how I started doing like the Middle East kind of papers. And then sort of once you've done one for a think tank, then another think tank will let you write for them because they can see, okay, you've written for another think tank. And then in sort of 2000, I thought, right, I want to write a paper on UAP, but I don't want to be writing like a blog on a website about UAP. I want to get something published, and I want to get it, written by a think tank which has like an international advisory board and which has, like legitimate academics behind it, people with PhDs, people who are respected. So I looked at the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and I'd already done an article for them on Iran and Iran's regional ambitions. And basically how you would run an insurgency in the Kurdistan region of Iran. So they were amenable to my writing about UAP. Initially, they said, "Oh, we're not so sure because we want to concentrate on Middle East issues." But then when I sort of showed them the kind of people who were talking about UAP, how it was being looked at in terms of legislation, and how it was like a strategic issue, then I kind of got to go ahead. And the Begin-Sadat Center, they've got a fair sprinkling former military generals who are also professors, people who've worked in military intelligence, rocket scientists. They had a Chaim Eshed, who was a former member of the former head of the Israeli Space Agency, who was there. Not the bloke who was saying that the Earth was like talking to a galactic federation of aliens, but a bloke who was his predecessor, and who actually said that the guy was thoroughly credible, and said to me, look, he said, and this guy was a rocket scientist as well, the guy that I was talking to, who was former head of the Israeli Space Agency, Chaim Eshed. And he said, look, in Israel, he said, we believe that we're not alone as well. So, and there's credible military people and intelligence people talking about it. So the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies seemed, the right place to get it published. And also as well, I was thinking, right, if you're going to get it done in Israel, because the Middle East, in terms of electronic emissions, it's lit up like a Christmas tree, and we know that UAP are attracted to electronic emissions, and the Israelis have one of the advanced air forces in the world, military forces in general. So I knew that the ISIS, with their radars and their satellites and their sensing capabilities, and also the high sort of tempo of kinetic operations they get involved with in the Middle East, targeting nuclear reactors, in Iraq and in Syria. I thought that somebody would be watching the ISIS and the other military powers in the area.
Do you think, like I've often wondered, if a lot of this surveillance is a preparation of battlefield operation? For those people that don't know what preparation of battlefield is, walk us through that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, intelligence preparation of the battlefield is actually it's a military intelligence discipline where you're literally it does what it says on the tin. You're preparing the battlefield in intelligence terms. You're looking at like, for example, likely enemy avenues of approach, ground that is go, no go, slow go, how weather might impede military operations, how the terrain is going to affect the tactics of the enemy moving through the area, and you have knowledge of their tactics as well. That's intelligence preparation of the battlefield. But if you talk about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, I think there's a very high chance that that's what UAP have been carrying out. There's actually two excellent papers by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, if you're a member. I wasn't involved in writing them, but they're on basically UAP interest and activity around nuclear sites in the US from 1945 to 1975, and they do one paper it's got all the statistics and the bar graphs and everything, and shows and they show basically the UAP interest around both the production sites, the processing sites, the deployment sites, like where the missiles are, and they contrast that with the UAP activity around regular air bases that that they're like fighter interceptor bases that don't have nukes and that type of thing. So it's very, very interesting. Two papers by the SCU on their website worth looking at, which delve heavily into like UAP interest into nukes. And for me, yeah, there is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance going on. People say, oh, well, they haven't done anything yet, so they can't be a threat, because if they haven't done anything by now, they're not going to. Well, we've only had nukes since 1945, right? And it's not that long ago, comparatively in history, that we were still firing bows and arrows at each other, yeah. And in the last sort of 100 years, military technology has increased exponentially. So if you're the owner or the operator of like a flying triangle, I think the first ones were seen in like 1894. And then I think it was 1906 that the Wright brothers fly the first aircraft. You go, oh, now the humans are flying in the air. And then by the 1940s, oh, they've got missiles now, and now they can put nukes on top of the missiles. Like a couple of a decade later, and now they're going into space, and they've also used nukes on each other. So this is a race of people that are they're basically parasites, like locusts, that go from one continent to another, and they destroy and completely overcome and overwhelm technologically inferior humans for the most part, although there are cases which I'll go into. So I would be worried about human beings and our kind of genocidal base instincts going out into space, or actually maybe if you're living on the Earth or living under the Earth or under the oceans, you'd be rather upset about the thousands of nuke tests that have been done, right? That might be disturbing your habitat and giving you headaches.
Yeah, headaches for sure. And speaking of headache, in the historical report, the first volume of the historical report by Dr. Sean Kirk Quadcopter, they essentially said that they were not going to include any of the nuclear cases in volume 1, but they are going to be in volume 2. I've interviewed 3 people involved with the nuclear incident, Bob Salas and David Schindley, who were both former nuclear launch control officers, and then Mario Woods, who was an above-ground military policeman assigned to a Minuteman squadron. And Schindley, I had debriefed after he had testified to Arrow, and this was way before he came back on our show to speak about his experience publicly, but he was not complimentary, and essentially said that Sean Kirkpatrick, I keep calling Kirkpatrick, and others just, they seemed disinterested. He was asked them if they wanted to know what the chain of command was at the base, etc. They had absolutely no interest, didn't record any of the interviews. There was no stenographer. They just took notes. Anyway, I'm in a long-winded way. What I'm saying is what I've been told by multiple sources is that the nuclear issue in volume 2, CIA, DOD, they do not want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. That the history of UAPs disabling, tampering, and retargeting of our strategic, or at least land-based strategic nuclear weapons, that whole issue is literally the third rail that they do not want to touch. So essentially what I was told is that they are going to whitewash the hell out of it in volume 2, and which is it's incredibly sad, but not surprising. I think it's yeah, you don't even want to know what I think about it. So let's go back to one of your white papers here. This is one that the first one that you published for the Menachem Begin Anwar Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, the Pentagon's UAP Task Force, Midi Security Policy Studies number 183. Walk us through maybe a bit of the highlights of what was in this report. It was a pretty extensive report.
Yeah, I mean, it was when the UAPTF had been mandated to be formed, and it was really like a walk back through memory lane from ORSAP, ATIP. I also looked at phenomena, in the work of Eric Davis and Colonel John Alexander, who's like a mentor to me, at Skinwalker, the cognitive sentient phenomena. But the thrust of the report was really like, are UAP sort of ours or theirs? And the thrust report was, well, actually there are unexplained phenomena that are not Russian, they're not Chinese, and they're not American or Brit or other advanced military nations. And then delving into the technologies behind them, I looked at everything from sort of old school UFO weapons theories to the work of sort of Hal Puthoff, Dr. Eric Davis, Dr. Jack Sarfati as well, in terms of the threat that they present and the types of technology that they might use and the type of weaponry that they have. And then I looked at, the origin potentially of, what our non-human intelligence is. And I looked at everything from sort of the temporal theories of Mike Masters, who's also, he's a friend, and also at SCU, to, ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial. So, and also I looked at things like, the great power competition for sort of global strategic, supremacy, and how the UAP issue would tie into that, and came to the conclusion that, whoever controls the, UAP technology first is the one that writes their ticket for global total spectrum dominance.
That is for sure. Now, there's another one that you did as well for same organization, American Development of UAP Technology. I can never say it. I can barely pronounce someone's last name. As opposed to saying something in French. What does that mean? A fait accompli, or however you say that?
Fait accompli basically means like a done deal. So American Development of UAP Technology, a done deal, a fait accompli. It was words that had been used by Lou Elizondo when he was saying that, to paraphrase him, that once Congress becomes sort of aware of the risks and opportunities, then then it may become a fait accompli that funding will be issued for a Manhattan Project style program with billions of dollars, a bit like the space race that we kind of equated it to push America forward to have UAP technology and to kind of get there first before the Russians and the Chinese. And I looked at the threat aspect again of UAP again in this paper, and I looked at some more cases like the Iran case and the Peru case, where UAP actually sort of attempted to intercept or did intercept unexplained aerial phenomena. And I also looked at slide 9, which Lou Elizondo had been asked about, and basically the risks and threats of UAP technology to the United States, and how it was imperative that came to the conclusion that it was imperative that America has it. And then the paper kind of concluded with, well, what's the likelihood of such a program being initiated, funds allocated for it, and Colonel John Alexander, being very measured as usual, he was always like, well, you can't have everything. There's things that you want to have, there's things that you need to have, and things that you'd like to have, but you don't have money to have everything that you'd like to have. So it's about priorities. And I think that's reflected as well. I mean, if you look at all the budgetary problems that the US Air Force is having, if you look at the problem of legacy platforms, they've had to cut back on the F-15X, they're retiring the F-22s, they've cut back on the number of F-35s. And they're worried, they want to get rid of older legacy platforms, because the older they get, the more expensive they are. And the same is going on in the nuclear sphere. 20 years ago, the strategic environment was different from what it is today. Russia and China have been investing in hypersonics. China exponentially increasing the number of land, sea, and air-based nuclear munitions that it has, and the hypersonic angle as well. So then you have the same problem for the Americans, that they've got legacy systems, and how do they get to a position whereby they can maybe survive an attack by either Russia or China and still be able to deter the other. So it's all these everyday real world funding issues.
Indeed. And we've been talking a bit about from the security angle, and I want to touch back on Colonel John Alexander, who of course was at Skinwalker Ranch before it was probably even called Skinwalker Ranch. And my question is, from what I understand, and I know very little about Colonel John Alexander, is that he experienced a lot of the woo, if you want to call it woo aspect of this phenomenon. I've experienced it myself. That was actually more disturbing, I think, than the orb that would show up above the house. But from a national security perspective, do you agree with people like Lou Elizondo and others that will say that the way to engage lawmakers is to strictly, on this topic, is to strictly approach it from the national security point of view, focus on the nuts and bolts, and don't bring up the woo aspect of it with lawmakers? Like, is that a bridge too far?
Yeah, I'd say yes and no. Yes, in terms of the DoD deals with threats, right? So if you want to get funding for something, you have to show that there's that there's a source of threat and that it presents risks, to the United States and its allies. Without a threat, then there's no funding. So in that regard, yeah, then you want to talk like nuts and bolts, i.e., like Eric Davis. We need to be by 2050. We need to have our engineering and physics, our science, so we can approximate the technology of the Tic Tacs, the UAP, if they decide if they are shown to be overtly hostile. And also, the other corollary of that is, we want to get there before the Chinese do, right? Because the Chinese want to overtake the United States. So whoever gets UAP technology wins that. But then, so you would concentrate on the nuts and bolts. But I've got some ideas on Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch, I can understand why Defense Intelligence Agency would be interested in it. I mean, you've got portals opening up and craft coming into basically American airspace. So that's kind of like slide 9, right? So if Russia or China could harness the ability to kind of create portholes, you could move a whole division through. You could move large numbers of troops through a portal. You could fly aircraft through a portal. The fact that UAP is coming through a portal and we don't know what they are is highly worrying. And then other aspects as well at Skinwalker Ranch that you'd want to harness as well. I mean, something that can exsanguinate cattle, within several hundred meters of a ranch in broad daylight, like leave no traces, like no blood on the ground, no tracks or anything like that. That's highly disturbing. And also, cryptid creatures that you can empty high velocity rounds into that don't seem to be affected and then just kind of like wander off and like disappear. So you'd want to know that kind of technology, because you'd want to know, well, how does this creature regenerate itself? How is this creature impervious to our weapons? And then you'd want to find something, is this creature a threat? Well, the one that Colonel John Alexander described on the ranch, that George Knapp in his book, the first Skinwalker book described on the ranch, this creature tried to grab, like a calf. But if you can exsanguinate like 200-pound cattle, right, in cattle mutilations, and these are potentially invisible entities, then you're going to worry, normally. So what could it do to a human being? So you'd want to harness those kind of. You'd want to understand what the nature of the threat is. You'd want to understand its capabilities. You'd want to harness whatever technology that is, so that you can counter it.
I certainly can understand why they would be studying that. And I noticed Colonel John Alexander was in both of your papers. Has he ever, either in the paper or, and again, I know very little about him, has he shed any light at all on the crash UAP crash retrieval program or anything like that? Because he seems like one of these people. He's been around since he's been in this, or been at this for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is to kind of like read his book, UFOs. What's it? Truth, Myths, and Conspiracies, I believe it is. Look for Colonel John Alexander's book. It's an excellent book on UAP. And it also talks about his time, when he visited NORAD and was talking about UAP and the tracks that they were receiving for UAP. And it also, in my first paper, because I interviewed him extensively, he was very, very generous with his time. He also talks about the possibility of crash retrievals. So I think rather than my speaking for him, people should read, what he gave me in that first paper, where he talks about crash retrievals. So he asked questions like, well, if you've got the capability to travel through, space and to get here, you'd be able to survive, not being shot down by radars and things like that, and you'd be able to survive like entry to the Earth. Why would there be crash retrievals? He kind of like puts it like at a balanced argument. Would we be able to shoot them down? Those types of things. There's actually a section in that first paper that says shoot them down, which deals with that, and John Alexander features quite heavily in it. So people should go and have a read of that.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out. My reading list is long. I have a lot of catching up to do. And speaking of the nuclear angle, and by the way, I have been inside NORAD. That was absolutely one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life. So going back to the nuclear angle, one of the things that I've heard from multiple sources, as I'm sure you have as well, is that UAPs are attracted, or that nuclear material can be used as a baiting procedure to bait UAP. So stick a nuclear warhead on a U.S. ship and move it around, and chances are a UAP is going to show up to observe or whatever it's going to do. Have you heard of any non-nuclear baiting methods as far as attracting UAP to study them?
Not specifically, no, but I mean, maybe, the whole sort of abduction phenomena. I mean, you kind of put people out as bait, maybe.
Yeah,
I mean, we do it. We do it. We do it with calves, don't we? When we want to hunt coyotes or wolves or lions.
I've never thought of that one. That's wow.
That's just me being morbid.
I completely understand. Speaking of morbid, what do you think of the debunkers? Do you think that, in your view, what I've hypothesized is that the coordination and messaging between these debunkers and especially these journalists, this clown that just put something out, I'm blanking on his name, Daniel something, that just put something out regarding this whole thing. I find it hard to believe that this is just a hobby and that they are not receiving some kind of, I don't know, financial compensation or something, or at least receiving coordinated talking points and messaging from one single source. It doesn't feel disorganized to me. It feels very organized. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, to me, it looks very organized. I mean, if you're talking about sort of the Wikipedia debunkers, I've been following Rob Heatherly's work and your work on it. I looked into it a little bit myself. They all seem to be linked in. The Center for Inquiry. They seem themselves to be very, very well equipped and funded and staffed. There's a whole network of companies linked to the Center for Inquiry, directors who sit at the Center for Inquiry who sit on everything from investment firms to aerospace and defense. They have aerospace and defense interests. I'm not saying that those are running the Center for Inquiry, but there's some very interesting connections there, and also just the lawfare that they get involved with. So if they don't like a pharmaceutical company putting homeopathic products on the shelf next to FDA regulated products, then next to scientifically proven pharmaceutical products, then they say that that they want to try and go after them legally, lawfare. And also as well, I think it's actually very, very threatening, because if they're saying that homeopathic medicine, traditional medicine like acupuncture, basically they're going after people's beliefs, whether it's Native American, whether it's Asian medicine, they're going after shamanic kind of type medicine from South America. They're going after people's belief and culture.
It's sad, and all I have to say regarding the guerrilla skeptics thing is that people in Washington are very aware of what is going on with them, and they are not happy at all. I wouldn't
be at all surprised, because they'd be going after the Wikipedia pages of everybody from Lou Elizondo to Hal Puthoff to George Knapp, and also people who are dead, people like Dr. James McDonald, who aren't around to defend themselves, which is particularly disgusting. And none of these debunkers seem to have a clue anyway about UAP history or any of the technologies, the science behind it, or any of the people who have been pioneers in the field like McDonald. So I find it quite disturbing, and I think it could quite possibly part of a wider cover-up that's involving both parts of the executive part of government and engaging sort of journalists who are journalists in inverted commas, and media outlets that are hostile to UAP phenomena in general.
Yeah, it's junk journalism at its finest. And of course, there is a long history. I don't know about it in the UK, but there was a long history in the United States of the CIA paying journalists. All of this came out in during the Church Committee in, I think it was 1972 or 1973, the Senate committee, that amongst other dirty tricks that the CIA was up to, and they are always up to a lot, that they had on the payroll something like 200 journalists, U.S. journalists, who their main target was to spread disinformation in foreign countries that of course, were pushing talking points of the CIA, but it doesn't surprise me. I think at the very least, the just kind of the abject arrogance of the debunkers and, for instance, this lady, Susan Gerbic, who runs the Guerrilla Skeptics, who I literally do not know what is wrong with these people. Anyway, moving on. If you have some time, I would love to go through some questions from our audience for you.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Firstly, last week we had the pleasure of having Dr. Bob McGuire, otherwise known as Science Bob, on, and he says hello. I love him. That was a fun show. I love that guy. Science Bob says hello to my brother Frank. Thank you for interviewing him. You're very welcome. Yeah, he's a good guy. Art Geigel, has he had to go through something similar to DOPSR, the Defense Authorization Pre-Publication Review? Have you had to do anything like that prior to doing interviews like mine or speaking about this publicly?
No.
Okay. Heiser Soze, question: does Frank have any thoughts on the Pentrix sighting? Probably should wait till the end to ask. Hopefully he will mention it.
The one in Wales, yeah, I'm in two minds about that. I read some stuff about it a couple of years ago. I'm not too sure. I think when I looked at it, I thought that it didn't really sound like special forces. But again, I don't know enough about it, so I wouldn't want to speculate.
Got it. Okay. Let's see here. Sam Danner, where do the crash retrievals go to in the UK, do you think? If you were to guess.
I'd love to know that one. Or maybe I wouldn't like to know that one because it'd be dangerous. Yeah, they'll probably go to some big hangar on a remote base, where they'll get picked apart. I don't know, and if I did know, I wouldn't be able to say.
Of course. Cosmo Warrior Zero. Besides Rendlesham, what other hot spots in the UK are there?
Ooh, that's a good question. I picked up a book actually to add to my collection of hundreds about hot spots in Scotland, which I've yet to go through. I think, yeah, I mean, have a look at that that sort of that scatter plot heat map from 87 to 97. That might be a good place to start. But to be honest, I haven't lived in the UK for years either. I've lived abroad since kind of 2001. So I'm not actively in the UK very much at all.
Let's see, David Smethurst, who's a good friend of the show. Love Dave. Yeah, Dave's the best.
We like Dave. He's a good lad.
Chat with him all the time. Does Frank think that possession of UAP tech by adversaries or U.S. would make nuclear deterrent redundant? That's an excellent question.
That's a great question. Sorry, the possession of, what was the question? Possession of UAP tech by?
So does Frank think that does Frank think that possession of UAP tech by adversaries or the United States would make nuclear deterrent redundant?
I think it would. I think it would definitely inject potentially high instability into nuclear deterrence theory, because one side would be seen to have a clear advantage. An example that you could look at the moment would be hypersonic weapons.
Right.
So you're concerned now, or the Americans and the Allies are concerned now, will Russian and Chinese hypersonic weapons with nukes be able to sort of bypass traditional defenses? So I think that the possession by one side or another of having UAP technology would maybe not completely destroy nuclear deterrence, because you still have those weapons, but it would inject a high degree of instability into the equation.
It certainly would, and the whole hypersonic thing has just shrunk that OODA loop considerably. It's not good. David Smethurst, what role does Frank think UK Special Forces have in the CIA Office of Global Access crash retrieval and UAP operations more generally? Does Frank think the U.S. Department of Energy has a link to UAP research in the UK?
I don't know about the Department of Energy. I'd imagine they have some kind of relationship with UK nuclear authorities, just because we built nuclear warheads in the UK, but we bought missiles from the Americans. So there's there's a historical relationship there and being close allies. Sorry, what was the other part of the question? In terms of sorry, what was it? The first part of the question?
Let's see here, going back. What role does Frank think UK Special Forces have in the CIA OGA crash retrieval program and UAP operations more generally?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a mate that I work with after we both left the military. He was, let's say, he was, probably one of these increment guys. He didn't specifically say that, but he said that there was a kind of symbiotic relationship between the UK Special Forces and JSOC, and that the way it worked, if there was a major problem to be sorted, what would happen is MI6 and CIA would get together, DIA as well. Both JSOC and UK Special Forces would be invited to present a plan for resolution of said problem, and then the plan would be chosen, and whoever had the best plan would then execute the mission. So I would imagine that would apply to UAP as well. Also, the world is divided up, for example, between the Five Eyes in terms of electronic intelligence, signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, communications intelligence. So I'd imagine that in terms of retrieval, it could also be kind of divided up that way as well between the closest allies. But again, I don't know, so I wasn't there and I haven't read the memo.
Me either. Laura Green, thank you so much for the super chat. You're very welcome. Lady Bentley from the UK, same as well. Keep up the good work, Matt, from Great Britain. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Nick the Nick the Lick. That's
Nick the Lick. Okay.
Yeah, all right. That's one hell of a screen name. Considering how new Matt is to this, which I am, he's quickly becoming a favorite host of mine for sure. Mario Wood's interview was the best. Nick the Lick, thank you so much. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I second that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Mario Woods, man. That was. I've worked in the entertainment business for a long time, but this is my first time doing it in front of the camera, and of course, interviewing people is a skill that takes a while to learn. And Mario was, I think, the first person where, I'm a bit ADD, so I tend to kind of jump and have to be very conscious not to jump on people when they're talking. And of course, with the Zoom interface and whatnot, it's difficult to do that without the delay. But Mario was the first person that I think I had interviewed early on where I just zipped my mouth and let him go. And it was the best decision I could have ever made, because his story and the emotion and what he has gone through is just so compelling. And and coming from a family that has a lot of military, my hat is off to people like yourself and Mario and others that have given everything for their country. There is no more selfless act than that, in my opinion. Okay. Hackology mods. Can you ping the TGTS email? I'm not sure what that means. I think that was a mistake. Let's see. I think that's it. So what do you expect? What if you had a looking glass, what would you predict for the UAP issue in the UK, and what would you predict for the UAP issue in the US for 2024?
Yeah, the US, more obfuscation and BS coming out from RO. I had high hopes for Kirkpatrick. I originally thought that he was kind of like a bloke caught between a rock and a hard place without the requisite authorities and kind of stuck between sort of DOD and IC. But nah, he's really gone down in my estimation big time. And I'm not sure about the new bloke. I'd like to think that he's better because he's a former Devil Dog Colonel, USMC. But then again, he's still got the same masters, and already kind of like his initial comments, he seems to be going along the Kirkpatrick path. So I think there's still going to be obfuscation from there. I'm hopeful that the IG will be looking, is going to progress with, Grush's testimony that was given, both the IG and also to Congress. Hopefully more whistleblowers will come forward. I don't know. And I think the UK is just going to be chugging along as usual in the same way. And unless there's some major earthquake that happens, and we'll be following the American example.
Yeah, what I have been told about the new Aero director is that he, number one, doesn't have the skill set to break past this impasse or whatever you want to call it, and number two, he has no desire. Yeah, the thing to consider about these folks is that career government bureaucrats or people that are in senior executive service, these are not the personality types that rock the boat. They have gotten to where they're at. They've rose up through the ranks in the SES by not rocking the boat, doing what they're told, not going rogue or whatever. So I absolutely have zero confidence that Aero is going to do anything truthful. I'll put it that way. I think that the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency, they know what they want to be put out, and they're certainly not going to let somebody like him come in and upset the apple cart. I think it's all about trying to keep the same insane talking points. But anyway, so how can people follow your work, Frank, and support what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter. It's the sort of main platform I use. I don't use Facebook much. I get loads of friend requests, but I'm only on there, like, I don't know, once every couple of months. Twitter's the best way, and I've got links to my work on there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on again.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I'm sorry about the interruption earlier.
All good. Awesome. All right, Franc Milburn, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
That was great. So, folks, if you enjoyed our show, we would appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, of course. And please, 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 please tell your friends about us on social media. We're trying to get the word out. The more people that watch, the more we can spread our message on this vital topic. And I think it's easy for those of us that have been tracking this to the whole UAP UFO issue. I think it's easy for us to forget that 99.9% of the people out there have no idea about what is going on with this. And especially, at least here in the United States, as Congress becomes more and more involved, it is, I think it's imperative upon all of us that are knowledgeable in this topic to share what knowledge we have with people that do not track this stuff. And I can tell you for sure, talking about Sean Kirkpatrick quadcopter earlier, this whole conspiracy theory. He's traded one conspiracy theory for another, that all of these folks in Congress and their staffers have been hoodwinked by this kind of UFO religion or UFO cult, and they've managed to convince people in Congress and their staffers to pursue this. And I can tell you for a fact that members in Congress and their staffers realize that Sean Kirkpatrick is absolutely full of shit. And they don't believe anything of what that report put out. I can't tell you if they're telling that to his face. I kind of doubt it, but I can tell you behind the scenes, they are not buying any of it. People in Congress, they realize that they've been continually lied to by the CIA and the Pentagon. People in Congress, our elected officials, they realize that all of this has been hidden from them illegally. They are well aware of the kind of dirty kinetic actions, retaliation, what works and what not, that have been conducted by the Central Intelligence Agency. And, and at the end of the day, all of these lawmakers, they are wildly aware of the very long history of very undemocratic things that the Central Intelligence Agency has done on behalf of themselves or what they think is for the good of the country. These folks know. And so for those of you that are worrying that all of this is going to go away, that these various clowns such as Stephen Greenstreet or this recent, I'm blanking on this recent journalist, Daniel, who put out that article last week, which was nothing short of just absolute trash journalism. The National Enquirer would put out better journalism than this guy. People in D.C., they understand, and when I say people in D.C., the elected people, they understand that they are being lied to and that the Pentagon and the CIA are trying to stuff this toothpaste back in the tube, and it is not going to happen. They understand that. So I do think that there will be some good developments coming up down the line. And when I talk about the CIA and the Pentagon and the negative things that they have done, the illegal things that they have done, that is not painting the entire agency or agencies or departments with that broad brush. There are very good people in all throughout government, in the Pentagon, in the CIA, in DIA, and elsewhere that want to do the right thing. As we've spoken about at length, government and these governmental organizations, Pentagon, CIA, they are not monolithic. You have various factions competing for power. One faction wants to do what they think is the right thing, and the other faction wants to do what they think is the right thing, which is mainly keeping money in the war pigs' pockets, as Tim Burchett likes to point out. So this isn't going away, and it is important that all of us support our lawmakers. Take the time to call your congressional representative's office, your congressmen and women, your senators. Call them, call their offices, and say, we deserve to know what is going on with this. Believe it or not, and I can tell you this, many congressional staffer has told me this is the case, that they log all of those calls. They do pay attention to it. So it's not just going in the trash heap. It's important that you reach out to these legislators and say, hey, we voted for you to do what you're doing, be it president or a lawmaker in Congress. And you cannot have a functioning democracy when you've got 50-ish people spread out through different nodes of government that are trying to hide this from everybody. And a lot of it is money. I can tell you that the market capitalization in reverse engineering this UAP tech is probably in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. And when, as we all know, money makes the world go around, unfortunately. So when you have that kind of money at stake, people are going to do illegal things, because at the end of the day, money brings out the worst in all of us. Let's face that. Anyway, so we appreciate everybody tuning in. Also, if you're on Twitter, we are very slow to build our following on Twitter, or on X, as Elon has rebranded it. So we are on Twitter at Good Trouble Show, and we would certainly appreciate the follow. And we will see you with more great guests, hopefully next week on the Good Trouble Show. Thanks for tuning in.